Novus, the new voice. Vox Novus, the new dimension. Vox Novus, thought and movement leaders who will share from their experience and offer tools to help us navigate our rapidly changing world. My name is Victor Fuhrman. Welcome to Vox Novus, the new voice. How may a near-death experience transform someone who was an atheist into both a believer and healer? My guest this week on Vox Novus, Barbara Harris Whitfield, had an NDE at age 32 that opened her to this understanding and dramatically changed her life. Barbara Harris Whitfield was a researcher at the University of Connecticut Medical School with psychiatry professor Bruce Grayson, research director for the International Association for Near-Death Studies. She and her late husband, Dr. Charles L. Whitfield, authored several groundbreaking books on healing from childhood trauma and spiritual experiences. She's been a guest on major television shows including The Today Show, Unsolved Mysteries, PM Magazine, Good Morning America, Oprah, and CNN Medical News. She also provides workshops and speaking engagements on topics of recovery, near-death experiences, and natural spirituality. Her website is barbara-whitfield.com, and she joins me this week to share her path, her wisdom, and her heartwarming experiences. Please join me in welcoming to Vox Novus, Barbara Harris Whitfield. Welcome, Barbara.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Barbara, you were a self-described atheist prior to your NDE in 1975. Please tell us about your early life and how it shaped your beliefs before what happened.
Oh, wow. What a question. I was abused a lot as a kid, emotionally just neglected. No spirituality at all, no religion. It was just, my parents had just come over from Russia and they didn't know what children needed. So I had a rough childhood, and so did my brother. And then this was back in the 50s. I went steady my entire high school with the same guy that I fell in love with when I was 14 and married when I was 18. And we promptly produced 3 kids and did everything that a looking good family should do. We had a swimming pool. We lived in Bloomfield Hills, Michigan. We had an airplane. We had a good life. We also had a lot of debt, but we didn't talk about that. I'm sure a lot of people from the 50s can relate to this. Anyway, I hurt my back in a swimming pool incident. I was tossed in when I didn't know I was going to be tossed in, and pulled my lower back like a whiplash feeling. And I spent the next 2 years on conservative care trying to heal it. And finally, in 1975, it was June, we agreed to a spinal fusion because they had put me in a full body cast for a month. And in that month, the pain stopped because my spine couldn't move. So anyway, we did that, and I woke up in a striker frame circle bed, which is a very awesome way to wake up. It's like a hula hoop, 2 hula hoops, and there's a stretcher in the middle. And I was suspended like that for a month. And then I was going back into the body cast where I was going to live in that for 6 months. Anyway, 2 days after surgery, I think it was 2 days after surgery, I started to die. My blood volume dropped low, and the next thing I knew, they were running in and hanging bottles and throwing things over me, and I hadn't become a respiratory therapist yet, so I didn't know what was going on, but I remember screaming, leave me alone, let me die. You know, for 2 years, I had been on heavy sedation with painkillers, and I wasn't being a mother, and I wasn't being a wife. I was being this sore back. So I'm ready to leave. And the next thing I know, I'm not in that room anymore. I'm not in that bed. I'm with my grandmother, who had died 14 years earlier. And I never once thought of her existing beyond her death. I didn't believe in anything from that realm. And we were together and she was holding me, and together we re-experienced the 19 years we had been together on the planet, and it was so full of love. I mean, she had love for everybody. She was my booby. And she was like every booby that they show in the movies and on TV and wherever. She was a true booby. And then I started moving away from her, but I knew somehow in my heart that she would be waiting for me the next time I came. And then I was back, but I wasn't back in my body. I was behind the nurse's station and I could hear them talking about my case. And then I was back in my body and I tried to tell them and they just kept telling me I had hallucinated, which back in 1975 was about it. And then a week later, it happened again. This time I wasn't on any painkillers. I wasn't on any drugs. But what happened was I was calling for my day nurse and she couldn't hear me because the door was closed. And the button for to call to the desk had fallen away from my bed. And I was lying on my belly in the circle bed. And it's very uncomfortable. And I started calling and then I started screaming. And then I left my body in the circle bed and looked out into space. And there I was at an infant lying in my crib, crying just as hard as the 32-year-old Barbara I had just left. So I went to her, and as I did, now you got to remember, I'm an atheist, and it was so incredibly hard for me in the beginning to use words because there just were no words for this until I started interviewing other near-death experiencers and realized a lot of stuff. But anyway, as I moved to her, I felt this energy move into me, and there are no words. It was eternity rolled into the most wisdom I've ever felt in my life, topped off with my ability to see every scene of my life review from God's eyes and feel what God was feeling in his heart. And together we re-experienced my life. And it seemed to take 32 years. And I kept hearing myself say, no wonder, no wonder. And that means to me, no wonder you are the way you are. Look at what was done to you when you were a child. And I saw all the abuse. But then I understood my mother too. She had had a horrible childhood, much worse than mine. And she was in a tremendous amount of pain. So all of this was with me when I came back. And my life has been a continued lesson on life since that happened to me, because that's what we're here for. We're here to learn. And within a couple of years, all the synchronicities were hitting me in the face to the point where even if you didn't believe in God after that happened, all the synchronicities were mind-blowing and so far away from anything logical. So within a couple of years, 9 years later, I divorced my husband. We just couldn't get together on anything. And I moved to Connecticut, and I worked at the University of Connecticut Medical School in the Department of Psychiatry, interviewing near-death experiencers and co-leading a support group for near-death experiencers, and grading all kinds of instruments where we had 500 people answering. A third of them had near-death experiences. A third came close to death and didn't have a near-death experience. And then a third didn't have either. I did that for 6 years. It was incredible. It was so wonderful to gather all this information. And for me, what I was going after was the energy. And there's definitely an energy arousal. I'm not saying that it's a completion. It's only the beginning. But we are aware of the energy and we're aware of the synchronicities. And we're just a lot more aware, or we go back to sleep. That's a decision every person has to make. But once you've experienced eternity, it's really hard to go back.
How would you defined in another interview that what you sensed in this vortex of energy was what you called the Holy Spirit. How would you define it?
Well, I love to say, and this is what I saw. I saw total darkness. But then churning in the darkness was energy. And this energy was pulling out lighter shades until it moved down and it became the light. It was pulling it out of the darkness. And that's what our life is all about. We all have a dark side as well as a loving side. If we don't pay attention to the dark side, it just stays dark. But what gets rid of the darkness? Light. And that's what the Holy Spirit is. This is a big metaphor that I'm giving you for personal growth. We go into the dark parts of our unconscious and we shine a light, and that's the Holy Spirit. And that's what I believe that's what was being shown to me.
You and your late husband, Charles, were undoubtedly soulmates, with both of you focusing on different aspects of healing. How did you meet, and how did your path together ensue?
Oh, that's such a wonderful question. Thank you. We met in 1985 at a conference in Washington, D.C. at Georgetown University, and it was those of us in consciousness research appealing to Congress for funding for the whole idea of consciousness existing after death. And what's so funny is at that time, we were really hot with the Pentagon because of the side effects when you spiritually awaken of psychic abilities. So it was the good and the bad.
Remote viewing?
Yes, that. And the one that was explained to me, and I'm deviating here, but who cares, is that when I think of something that is loving to me, my heart will jump a little bit. And when my heart jumps a little bit, it flips the tape player. And then there's a permanent ticking on the tape. Well, the Pentagon has figured out if they can show me where the chip is in a tank. Can you believe this? This was in the 80s and 90s. Mm-hmm. That I could knock out a tank. And there's a whole book about this by John Alexander, who was in the Pentagon at the time and wound up president of our board for the research. So anyway, there's been this was a book that I wrote. This was my first book called Full Circle. And the whole book is nothing but synchronicities. From the time I've had my near-death experience to today, these things are happening that are just guiding me, and I'm kind of laughing and going with it. And that's how Charlie and I were. I mean, you asked about how we started. So we met there in Washington, and I had spoken, and he heard what I had said because it was all consciousness research comparing Ken Ring's work. Anyway, so he came up and introduced himself, and, he had really nice energy, but I cannot remember what he looked like that next 5 years. It took him 5 years. But besides that, he would call me a couple times a year at the university and ask me research questions. And I would send him copies of papers because that was before the internet. Anyway, 5 years into that, chit-chatting on the phone and writing papers, what happened was, let me back up. The Friday night before he called me, I'm lighting my candles, and my boys were living with me, but for some reason they weren't there that night. And these are my Sabbath candles. And I look right through the two flames and I realize this is a direct line to God. So I said, God, please send me someone kind. Send me someone smart. I'm obviously very smart, and it was really hard hiding that all the time. Anyway, and then this came out of nowhere. I have no idea, except I think God was telling me what was going to happen, because out of my mouth came, send me someone I deserve. Now, I didn't know, but Charlie Whitfield, who had been out in California giving a talk, he and a friend were praying for meaningful relationships. At the same time, I was davening over my candles.
Wow.
Yeah. Monday night, I'm on Larry King Live, and Charlie comes home and turns on the TV, and there I am, and he realizes Friday night he's flying up to where I live in Hartford, Connecticut, and he calls me up and asks me to dinner. So, and to back up again for a second, in our research, I was the one that came up with, kept pushing child abuse, because from the feedback I was getting from my audiences who were listening to my life review, they would come up to me and say, I was abused as a child too. And then they would tell me about their spiritual experiences. So they were telling me that spiritual experiences and child abuse go together. And Ken Ring's theory on that is we dissociate when we're in pain. And as adults, that's what he called a compensatory gift, because we know how to dissociate. So we know how to focus on an alternate reality. We may not know we're doing it, but we're doing it. So we're the ones that can see this stuff. And then there are lots of people too that haven't been abused that also have near-death experiences. Anyway, so that was Ken's theory. And then when I wanted to start working on child abuse, my colleagues said, no, that wasn't their thing. And that was 1990. Then Charlie calls and asks me for dinner. And he had sent me his book, Healing the Child Within, which I had never opened. So I grabbed it quickly, started reading it, and this was the biggest synchronicity of my life. Charlie had done all the work that I wanted to start, and we fit together like a glove. On all of our research, all of our writing, we had such that's the relationship I miss the most, is how we could sit down and write an article in an hour, some kind of op-ed, or write a book in 6 months. Accept the Power of Humility. That took 5 years.
It is fascinating to me that you were peering between these two flames, between these two candles.
Yeah.
And he was praying at the same time.
Yes.
You literally are twin flame soulmates.
Yes. And the other thing he told me, but it took several years for him to do it, was that he had a picture of me from one of my conferences where they have pictures of us. He had it next to the TV, and he used to hold it and look at it and say, why can't I find someone like her? So, I mean, the story is just hilarious. I've had so much fun telling it, because we really are when Harry met Sally with a high IQ.
Wow. And what were your individual and mutual practices, healing practices like?
I was doing energy work. I had so much fun doing energy work, but then I realized I had to make my sessions longer because everybody wanted to talk to me. So I'd give them a half hour talking, and then I'd do an hour of energy work. And Charlie was referring me patients, and a lot of them had been sexually abused, and that needs to be vibrated out of a person. I mean, I watch so many people get better just by continuing to tell them to let their body vibrate and just holding my hands on either side. And then I was also I was teaching families how to do hands-on, like even 6 people, including kids as young as 3, how to do hands-on work on a dying relative. So that became really important for me too. And that was all in Baltimore. So when Charlie and I moved to Atlanta, and listen, we had absolutely nothing going on in Atlanta. We had Charlie's brother, and that was it. And how we had found a house was we went out the next day after Thanksgiving with a realtor that was at the Thanksgiving dinner and saw our house and bought it. We knew it was our house, but we had nothing going on. When we moved there, within a year, Charlie was at the CDC doing the ACE study. That is exactly what proves his writing starting in the 80s.
Amazing. And you talk about the word synchronicity, which Jung coined to mean meaningful coincidence without causal connection. That's been a watchword in my life since my teens, or actually before my teens, but not recognized until my late 30s and early 40s. This is something that's there for each and every one of us, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Once you make the connection, and, I love in AA, they say, fake it till you make it. You don't even have to believe it. All you have to do is have the intention that you want it, and just ask God to connect with you and start guiding you. And get ready. It's a journey without distance to a goal that has never changed. It's inside of us. It's our human heart. And all we need to do is to do the connection. And then the synchronicities can be so funny, but they're also very, very deep if you learn how to really interpret them. And they even come in clusters. And the clusters, it's the central theme that's guiding. And it's hilarious when they're like 3 in a row. Like, did Spirit have to bang me over the head 3 times before I finally get it? And we did some research on this with the author of a book called Signs. And I wrote the introduction to the book. These are very, very special synchronicities. Robert Perry is the author, and in the work that we do to interpret these, we pull out so much more wisdom. And when there's a cluster of them, it's such a celebration of spirit to know that we're getting this kind of communication if we'll only listen.
Absolutely. I remember in the early 90s reading James Redfield's The Celestine Prophecy.
Yeah.
And I said to myself, take away the adventure story that he weaves this around. Mm-hmm. And he's talking about my life, the way I've been living my life, these insights that keep coming. And you have 3 choices. You could either dismiss them out of hand. You could say, yes, that's interesting, but for later. Or could you say, yes, that's for now. And every time I said for now, another one came and another one came. And it's been beautiful and wonderful. And I'm grateful for those.
Mm-hmm. Gratitude. That's what gives the fuel to this kind of energy.
Absolutely. My guest, Barbara Harris Whitfield, she has a body of work that we're going to be discussing. Barbara, please tell our listeners where they can get your books and Charles' books and your collective works and all about you.
You can go to our website, barbara-whitfield.com, and all the books are up there. I think the only one that's out of print right now is Spiritual Awakenings, because that's all my research at the university with Bruce Grayson. That's what we came up with, and there's a lot in there about Kundalini. We used Kundalini as our map because to us it was the most advanced. But it's also Ruach HaKodesh, it's Holy Spirit. It's a million different names according to different religions, but it's all the same thing.
And we'll be back with more of Barbara after these words on the OMTimes Radio Network.
Free your mind with OMTimes Radio, IOM FM. OMTimes Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. OMTimes, co-creating a more conscious lifestyle.
If I could be you,
and you could be me, for just 1 hour.
If you could find a way
to get inside
each other's mind.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
We've all felt left out. And for some, that feeling lasts more than a moment. We can change that. Learn how at belongingbeginswithus.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Back on Vox Novus, my guest this week, Barbara Harris Whitfield. Barbara, there was a prolific authorship between you and Charles. Let's start by honoring Charles' work. He authored more than 50 articles and 10 best-selling books on trauma and recovery. Let's start with Healing the Child Within. What were some of the ideas offered in this book on healing childhood trauma?
Well, let me tell you his story. This was in the late 70s, early 80s, and he was working at a university medical school in both psychiatry and as a professor of internal medicine. He had a practice at the university, and it was families. And his families, he noticed, the ones where somebody was a drinker, a big drinker, the rest of the family was trading diseases. Everybody would take turns being sick. And he then noticed that in one particular family, the father went to AA, stopped drinking, and everybody got better. So Charlie went to AA to see what they were doing and realized that they really had so many answers that medicine doesn't have. And he actually brought an AA meeting to the university for the medical school students and the residents to witness an AA meeting. And then he got involved in something that way back then was something about professionals caring for adult children of alcoholics, because they were starting to see that the trauma was what was grasping these families and keeping the illness going, because there was alcoholism and there was a lot of anger. From there, he started writing about it and it was getting published, in journals. But then he decided he wanted to do a handout for his patients to understand his idea of how we heal from repeated childhood trauma. And I have been deeply steeped in this for the last almost 32 years. And it's amazing. It's wonderful. He had the wisdom and the insight and the intelligence way back then to map this all out. And his map goes something like stage 0 is an active addiction, an active illness, an active mental illness, a physical, psychological. It's any kind of illness running wild. Now, stage 1 recovery is getting a grip on that stage 0. And again, that could be cancer, it could be Crohn's, it could be any disease, but it could also be dangerous behavior and people dying young, suicidal or otherwise. He took a look at that and he talked about stage 1, which is addressing that stage 0 malady. See, if we just cure the malady, there's no healing. There's curing whatever it is, but it's going to plant itself somewhere else because we're carrying that trauma in our immune system and the rest of our body too, stress-wise. Anyway, stage 2 recovery is what he and I did. And we taught it. We taught it all over the country. We taught it at Rutgers University every summer. And what that is in stage 2 is the person who's healing is whenever they're expressing something that was upsetting, we tie it back to when they were a child. And they understand the connection and why they're maybe overreacting, maybe not reacting at all, who knows? But it's an adventure to realize how we're being manipulated by our childhood wounding that we never got to express and get rid of. Charlie used to say we were traumatized twice. It was the trauma, and then it was the trauma of not being allowed to express our feelings about it. Mm. So that's stage 2. And then we were lucky enough to have a stage 3 group, which is spirituality in terms of taking everything that's happened and making meaning out of it. An example would be, my mother used to really torture me as a child. But if that hadn't happened, I wouldn't be who I am now. And I wouldn't be working with, Charlie Whitfield, who to me is the greatest 1980s and 90s recovery physician, around during that time. And he left a lot more than 10 books. He's got medical books too that he didn't count. But I think between the two of us, we have 30 books.
Wow. And his book, Wisdom to Know the Difference.
Now that's people who are in recovery are just wanting this book. We have gotten so many letters and so many emails, and it's finally out. It was out a couple of years ago, and it took him a long time. And it's the core issues. When we would do group, by the end of the group, which is an hour and a half, we would ask the people participating, and they would come up with what they thought was the core issue for that particular therapy session. And he described 15 core issues like fear of feeling love, inability to express anger, you got to see the core issues there. And So that's that book. And that's an excellent book if you're already in recovery. So you've begun to understand experiencing our feelings. See, our feelings are coming up from our body. They are not part of what's going on in our head. Our head is telling us a different story. And I think that Charlie's work ultimately was getting us to be able to have our heart and our head negotiate.
Yeah, absolutely. Is that related at all to the science of epigenetics?
I don't know that much about it. I know it's a new science and it's really needed, but I don't know that much about it. I know that there are shortcuts that we came across along the way, and one of them is emotional freedom technique.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a great write-up on that on Dr. Mercola's website.
For listeners not familiar, just briefly describe EFT.
Okay, emotional freedom technique. When I first moved to Baltimore to be with Charlie, he introduced me to the social worker in his clinic and told her about my fear of thunderstorms. And we went over to a corner and she had me like work myself up into feeling the fear of a thunderstorm is coming. And then she slowly but surely tapped my forehead, tapped my hand, did a pattern of taps that break the energy loop that's keeping us locked in our fear. And I have not feared a thunderstorm since, and that was about 35 years ago.
Powerful. Very powerful.
Yeah.
Please tell us about your book, Spiritual Awakenings, Insights on the Near-Death Experience and Other Doorways to Our Soul.
Yes. First, thank you. First of all, near-death experiences are not the only thing that do the exact same thing I'm about to describe, and that's childbirth, tremendous loss, meditation over the years, yoga spontaneously, the loss of a loved one, being with someone as they die and beginning that experience with them. There's all different triggers, and it doesn't have to be near death. The one that I related to a lot for my research was what they call the trauma transcendence interface. You are in a huge trauma, and suddenly you're gone from that trauma, and you're in, we can call it 5D, we can call it whatever you want to call it, but we're not in this reality anymore. And then we're back. And if we nurture and honor it, the after effects are the very same as having a near-death experience.
And how much of this, you had talked about the EFT and this work, how much of this relates to this concept of Kundalini energy?
Well, the word Kundalini, my book, Spiritual Awakenings, which I wrote in 93, was canceled by my publisher in 94 because the editor said, you can't talk about Kundalini. It's a secret.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah. So a year later, she was fired and they took my book. But this is the research that Bruce and I did. And like I said, the reason why we picked Kundalini was because in the medical models in the East, they're using this energy for healing. When it comes to energy, they're so far ahead of us. Anyway, so that was a great map. Now, I'm also talking about Kabbalah with the Ruach HaKodesh. I forgot that for a second. And there's a bunch of other words too. And yoga, it's all the same energy. It's the energy that we share with God, that God shares with us. And it's all these egos that have put together the names. But the scientists who have done the research have done us a tremendous good thing, because if we can get that energy cleared in this lifetime, we can clear whatever it is that's bothering us physically or emotionally or mentally. So that's the journey. The journey is back to self. And like I said before, it's a journey without distance to a goal that's never changed. It's us going inside. I believe that that's what the goal is. The goal is to become all that we can be. And the way to do that is to go inside, clear whatever needs to be cleared.
It's fascinating that if you look at many cultures and faiths and languages, there is a word for what you described.
And it is.
You have prana, you
Yes.
have pneuma, you have the ruach. You
Yeah.
have all of these expressions, which are basically terms for breath, but they're not just breath, they're spiritual breath.
Right. Right. And in Kabbalah, there's this exercise where when we breathe in, we're breathing in God's out breath.
Mm.
And when we breathe out, we're breathing into God's in breath.
Mm.
And you do that for about 15 minutes. And there's no drug in the world that can outdo that.
Absolutely. Grief is something that is common to all of humanity, and we each process it in our own and unique way. Your book, Final Passages, Sharing the Journey as This Life Ends, answers many of the questions we have about what happens when we die. What do you offer readers in Final Passages?
Okay, death is not the Grim Reaper. That's been around for centuries to scare us and control us. When we die, it's a trip into the light. If we have any side trips, it's something that we need. So just go with it and learn from it. But eventually, we're going to get to that light because the light is God's love. And so death is not the Grim Reaper. It is a trip into the light. It may take several lifetimes to get there, but what the heck? This is fun. Once we clear up the most painful parts of our past, life can be fun and it can be rewarding and it can be educational and it can be everything we want it to be if we truly believe that we are worth it.
That's really the essence of it, isn't it? Finding our self-worth, self-love.
Mm-hmm. What an adventure.
Tell us about AFGES, a guide to self-awareness and change. First of all, you're laughing. I know why. What does AFGES stand for?
That's called AFGES, and it's another effing growth experience. You know, when
and
you
what is
step
that
into
experience?
the doo-doo and you just know that you're going to have an AFGE.
Give us a couple of AFGEs you've had.
I can't think of any right now. I don't want to, but do you have any?
Oh, I have several thousand, but we don't have time for that. And you know what? You and I have so much to talk about. This will be the first of several shows. I know that's going to happen because there's so much for us to cover. And quite frankly, audience, I just want to let you know that finding Barbara and her work has been like a reunion of spiritual family for me. She's just wonderful. And Charles was wonderful. And their work, their body of work is just amazing and something that everyone should look into because they offer us so much. Guides for living, guides for dying properly, guides for living properly, guides for loving and having a great life. So thank you, Barbara. Thank you for all of the work that you share.
Thank you for saying that. That's wonderful.
Let's talk about another book,
Yeah.
The Natural Soul.
Oh, my heart was bursting when I decided to write that book. And I realized that if you let it out, that becomes joy. So when I wrote that book, it was mostly joyful, except we have one chapter on trying to answer why children die, or just about this happened right in the middle of me writing the book. And I love to write about things I'm experiencing because that's what I know. Everything else is just learning and an education, but I want to write things about what I know. And I had loved, I forget his name, but he wrote The Natural Mind. He's a physician. I can see him, but I can't think of his name. Anyway, so I wanted to write The Natural Soul, and I wanted to give stories that to me were so soulful. So it was a wonderful book to write, except that one chapter really hurt, but we knew we needed to have it in there. And I just Charlie and I delivered his first grandson. We were in the delivery room. He cut the cord. I mean, we just had the best time having this baby with my stepdaughter. Just soulful moments like that.
What a beautiful thing to be able to share.
Yeah, well, that's why I write. And, I've noticed since Charlie died, I've been staying away from any long writing things because we helped each other so much. He was my editor. That YouTube that you saw me in a couple weeks ago, do you know that's gotten over 110,000 views?
Not surprised.
In a couple of weeks. Anyway, everybody started writing me through the website. And I've been answering everybody. And it's just a joy because what it is they've got the seeds growing and I get to help, water the seed or however you want to talk about it. But these are people that are open to questions that are beautiful. And I just love answering them. So I've been doing a lot of writing, but not the kind of writing that you would publish, the kind of writing you would share.
Absolutely. My guest is Barbara Harris Whitfield. We'll be back with more after these words on the OMTimes Radio Network.
Humanity Healing International is a small nonprofit with a big dream. Since 2007, HHI has been working tirelessly to bring help to communities with little or no hope. Our projects are not broad mandates, nor are they overnight solutions, but they bring the reassurance that no one is alone and that someone cares. To learn more, please visit humanityhealing.org. Humanity Healing is where your heart is.
Hello, I'm Sandy Sedgbeer, host of OMTimes Magazine's flagship radio show, What is Going On? My passion is sifting through information, research, and innovations from new thought teachers, speakers, and researchers pushing back the boundaries of what we know about life, energy, metaphysics, and the universe. I love shifting perceptions about who we are, why we're here, and how quickly impossible becomes normal when we open our minds, expand our awareness, and accept that the only limits that exist are those we place upon ourselves. So if you're the kind of forward-thinking, eager investigator of what lies beyond the current reality that most perceive, why not make a date to come play with me in the field of possibilities at 4 p.m. Pacific Time, 7 p.m. Eastern Time every Thursday, and together we can discover what's really going on.
Imagine yourself being transported to India, to the banks of the Ganga and an ashram in Rishikesh. Visualize that you are welcome to satsang with an American sannyasi who shares the wisdom of her guru. Your visualization has manifested. Join Sattvi Bhagawati Saraswati for inspiration and transformation every Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern on OMTimes Radio.
Adopt US Kids presents What to Expect When You're Expecting a Teenager. Learning the lingo.
GOAT, G-O-A-T, acronym, stands for Greatest of All Time. As in, spaghetti sandwiches for dinner? They're my fave. Dad, you're the GOAT.
You don't have to speak teen to be a perfect parent. Thousands of teens in foster care will love you just the same. Visit adoptuskids.org. Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Adopt U.S. Kids, and the Ad Council.
Back on Vox Novus, my guest this week, Barbara Harris Whitfield. Barbara, you had mentioned having difficulties with traditional publishing. Is traditional publishing part of the cancel culture?
Observed, and I won't mention any names, not my ex-publishers or anything, but what I have observed is that any book or any discussion that is furthering the whole idea of self-empowerment, they are trying to get rid of. And Charlie, in my books, every single one of them is a roadmap to self-empowerment. So we started getting canceled not too long ago, since he's died. And I was kicked off of Facebook. I understand that now that's a badge of honor. But then all of a sudden I turn around and I see this email from a company called the Wellness Company, and I start reading what they're about. And I knew of a couple of the physicians who are on their panel, and they're good people who spoke up and are not working where they worked before. They have started this company called the Wellness Company. So I joined. And as I started listening to their videos, I realized that they're in the exact same camp Charlie and I were. So I called right away and I talked to the executive assistant, and she said to me, "We want your books." And then I said to her, "I'd like to teach at your conferences because I want the way we did, the way we led group therapy. I want that to continue. It's important. And it's not exactly the way it is in psychiatry, because I experienced that when I was doing research at the university. The kind of group therapy that we did you had to read the books. You had to read the books to know where this was going. And they all had our books. And then we could talk about it from that standpoint, which takes you out of the pain and gets you to look at whatever whatever you're doing. Look at the action of it and decide if you want to keep doing it that way or you have other choices. So that's the kind of group therapy. So anyway, the woman said right away, absolutely. So, I might be 80, but I just feel like I'm back in business again. I'm going to get out there and talk about what we did, because what we did was wonderful. I knew it sure helped me, and I could see how many people were getting helped by the kind of therapy Charlie invented. And he invented that 40 some years ago. And then the last 20 years, he proved it at the CDC.
You're talking about being 80. I turned 70 in January. Age is really a stepping stone, isn't it? We have purpose at every stage of our lives if we seek it.
Absolutely. And being aged is fun if we let ourselves know that it's okay to have fun. And people keep telling me I don't look 80, I look 65. Well, guess what? It's not my body. It's my energy. It's my love of life. It's my belief in the human mind and spirit and heart and belief in. I hug trees. What can I tell you?
Me too.
So anyway, being old, the only thing with being old is you never know when you're going to die. And that's complicated. So you just have to find your sense of humor, and it's usually very dark, about the fact that someday, if not sooner or later, God's going to call us home. And that's good. That's okay. The only part that's hard is leaving the people we love. That's not okay. But we will be with them again. This is the whole message that people have been giving that had these experiences. The soul continues. The body and hopefully the ego die. But that energy, that spark, that's each one of us, that doesn't die. It goes to a different dimension.
Absolutely. The last book you co-authored with Charlie is entitled Dragon Energy, Myth and Reality. Tell us about it.
I've been talking about spirituality for years and years and years, and I always have to list all the different names for the same energy. And in more than 20 years ago, I think it was, Charlie started going to something called Dragon Con in Atlanta. And we're talking about 90,000 people having a 4-day party. And this is in downtown Atlanta. And the theme is usually dragons and all kinds of heroes, just, the comic heroes. We even had Stan Lee there a couple years in a row, and he was wonderful. But all these people come in to speak, and then there's all kinds of fun stuff. And it's 4 days of having a great time, and it's dragon energy. So with that, the first year I started was 2015. Charlie had already been going for years, but I started 2015 because poor boy, that year he couldn't get anybody else to go with him. So I went. Well, needless to say, I became Alice in Wonderland. And the first talk I went to, and we're talking about 5 hotels having classes going all day and all night long. The first class I attended was by this master artist, dragon artist named Suelo, and he's from Spain. And they always they feature him in the art show. And his painting that year was the poster and the program book. And we now have the original. I mean, this painting just grabbed my heart because the myth of the dragon has been around since the beginning of man. Every culture talked about this, and they didn't know each other. And in the East, the dragon is the creative energy, the Holy Spirit. That's the dragon in the East. It's very positive. It can be punishing, but it's punishing for positive reasons. Then in the West, especially in Europe, The dragon is the ego, and we need to slay it. So either way you want to go, using the myths expresses experiences that we're having. And that's the painting that I have in the Dragon Energy book. And I explain that I had that experience that he painted. And it's a amazing experience. Anyway, in the next year after we met Solelo and his wife and 2 kids, we invited them to come early for Dragon Con. They came a week early, and we spent the week with them, and we showed them Atlanta. And they started counting how many dragons we had in the house, and it was hysterical. I had dragons in our china. We had Chinese rugs all over the place that had dragons. I mean, paintings of dragons. And we realized that dragon energy is the way we can express from the myth and from our reality of it. We can express how to pump up this energy and live with it. And of course, with a moral, what do you call it? What am I trying to say?
A moral compass?
Thank you. I don't want people to get dragon energy and not have a moral compass. They're going to get into trouble. But anyway, so that's when we started writing the Dragon Energy book. We were able to translate so much of what we had written about, and it held us back because of the religious connotation. But with Dragon Energy, we could say whatever we wanted, and we plugged it into Charlie's levels for healing, the 4 stages of healing. And we plugged it into Kundalini. And we plugged it into everything we had done over the years this was like our culmination book, taking all of our work together and explaining it through the myth of the dragon.
Beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
What a fitting final book for the both of
them. Yeah. And you know where we got the whole idea of dragon energy from? What's his name that was married to, what's her name? He's black, and he went to visit Trump when Trump was president, and he had his feet up on the desk. Kanye West.
Oh, Kanye West. Okay.
Kanye West has dragon energy, and so does Trump. And Trump never sleeps. Trump is a go-getter all the time. Trump is always planning. That's all dragon energy. And those are the people that are changing the world. And whether you believe in him or not doesn't matter. What matters is we're going through a lot of changes by exposing what's going on. And to me, that's all the dragon.
Absolutely. Dragon has changed. There's no question about it. Is there a message you would offer our listeners based upon all of your experience and wisdom?
Oh, wow. Choose love. Just, love is the verb for God. God isn't a person sitting on high judging us. It's an intelligent energy that really, really, really loves us and wants us to know that we have him or her. This is before gender, that we have that in us too. And the way we find it is to practice love. And I'm talking about unconditional love. I'm not talking about loving someone so much that you're going to tell them what they're doing wrong. I'm talking about being supportive and loving to the people around us that we love. And that's the work of God.
And from the music of Justin Hayward of the Moody Blues.
Yeah.
As we both love and share, the lyric, when you stop and think about it, you won't believe it's true, that all the love you've been giving has all been meant for you.
Yes. Yes.
I'm looking for someone to change my life. I'm looking for a miracle in my life. And if you could see what it's done to me, to lose the love I knew, could safely lead me to a land that I once knew, to learn as we grow old the secrets of our soul. Question, 1970 became my personal anthem. My wonderful guest, Barbara Harris Whitfield. Barbara, one more time, please tell our listeners where they can get your books and Charlie's books and find out more about your amazing work.
Well, thank you for that question. Please go to barbara-whitfield.com. That's BARBARA-WHIT field.com. All our books are listed. And there's a page with our op-eds. Some of them we wrote together, some of them we wrote personally, separately, but we're proud of them, and it's very current with what's going on in the world. Some of our books, like I said, are out of print. Amazon still has most of them, but not Spiritual Awakenings. The Wellness Company is going to start publishing our books, and it's worth a look for you personally, too, to see what they've got besides what they're calling the Well, which is where their vitamins and minerals and, all that good stuff, and our books are. And I'm just so grateful to them. The other thing is I've started a nonprofit in Charlie's name. It's the Charles Whitfield Charity for Healing the Child Within. And we're going to be certifying therapists in what Charlie called trauma psychology. And we're also going to be having conferences for the public to learn more about this kind of healing.
What a beautiful legacy.
Yeah. And boy, does he deserve it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing all of this wonderful work.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us on Vox Novus. I'm Victor, the Voice Fuhrman. Have a wonderful week.